I'd like to spend more time discussing the economy because we're in the midst of a historic economic collapse,
Yes.
so I feel like that might be apt. Could you share some of your thoughts on the policies Sri Lanka needs to adopt going forward? Now, there's two things. I mean, there's policies for stability, for solvency, for liquidity. But there's also policies for growth. Now, is there a balance between the two? Because on one side, we are insolvent, essentially. We've never been... We're bankrupt.
Yeah.
On the other side, we're in a recession. So the only way out of recession is to grow. So how do you balance the two, in your view?
I think, obviously there are short-term measures and there are longer-term measures. But I think in order to plot a sustainable road out of this to a better future, which is I think what most Sri Lankans want, I think it needs a fundamental reappraisal of our whole development strategy.
Okay.
So this, and I think it's very unfortunate. And I was talking to you just before we started went on air that one of the problems in Sri Lanka is this demonization of your political opponents,
right? Which
leads to people not looking objectively at the record or at the facts, right? Now, although I'm not sure the current administration, the administration that just stepped down, although it made some grievous policy mistakes, particularly on taxation, that precipitated the current crisis. This current crisis has been brewing for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And unless we understand that, we are condemned to make the same mistakes.
Okay.
And I would bet the same things will happen the moment we get an IMF agreement and we get out of it, we will go back to business as usual. So I think we have to start back and think, what was the original failure? I think in the short run, I think everyone knows this, we desperately need an IMF agreement simply because that is the only way that and together with that, a restructuring of our debt, much of which is held by private investors in the United States. Those two things need to happen to get us back into a position where we can get international financing. So I think that's sort of the medium-term goal by the end of this year. To do that, we're going to have to demonstrate that we have a credible plan to pay down our debt over the medium term, and that means essentially raising more revenues than we spend, and that has to be based, as the IMF keeps on telling us, and I think I'm on social media, this is not well appreciated by some people in the political class. IMF, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, they have been telling us for years our primary problem is we don't collect enough taxes, and unless we collect substantially more taxes in the short term and longer term, we're not going to be able to lay a basis for recovery and prosperity.
Reg, you've been a little different, shall we say, against the grain, contrarian on this, because a lot of people on the fiscal equation...
I'm consistent with the IMF. So
well,
I'm not contrarian to the IMF.
I think I want to come to that, because actually what you're focusing, your emphasis is on the revenue side of the fiscal equation. Now, what is the traditional, the understanding within a lot of us, especially in Colombo, I can speak for mainly my circles, right? Sure. That we see the Sri Lankan government as spending way too much, as being wasteful on what they spend. We see the size of the government, the number of state employees, all this seems to be emphasized as the main issue. So could you give us your perspective on this and basically look at Sri Lanka's tax revenue as a percentage of GDP, and also who we are taxing and in what way we're taxing?
So let me make one observation first. Those ideas or beliefs that you just said, that we spend too much, we have too many public servants, that we need to cut spending. This is not new.
Yeah.
The political class have been saying this for 30 years.
Yeah.
They've pursued a fiscal and economic strategy based on that assumption. Look around you. Has it worked? Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter whether the cat is red or black as long as it catches the mice. Well, the cat we've been pursuing the past few years based on that notion hasn't caught the mouse or the mice, right? So it's failed.
Right.
So I think let's be real about this, right? Now, if you look at the objective data, so even if you don't know what the objective reality is, we need to maybe ask again, is that true? Is that really going to get us out? Because we've been doing that, right? And it's not true anyway. And I think that the IMF has pointed this out to us in the most recent statement they made back a couple of months ago. It's been pointed out also very extensively by the Asian Development Bank. I just read one of their reports earlier this year, which I read it last night. But they make 2 points. First of all, in terms of spending, compared to our income level, and it's important to compare to our income level because in general, as countries become richer, they spend a greater proportion of their national income through public spending. Right? Because people want better social services, they want better infrastructure, they need better income redistribution. Right? So this is a general pattern, I would say, of capitalist market-led development.
Okay.
Taxes go up as a share, spending goes up. Okay. And it also becomes easier to collect taxes. The other thing that happens is that taxes go up. Okay. Now, if you look at spending, Sri Lanka is not a high spender. Government spending is far below what comparable developing countries at our income level spend, right? And you know, I have a slide here. This is from the Asian Development Bank, and you know, this is, I think you'll show the chart.
Yeah, we'll show the chart on the screen.
But you know, this is an estimate that was done a few years ago, back in 2018. In 1990, we were spending 30% of GDP.
Right.
Government spending. At that time, that was about par for countries at our income level.
Right.
We have since become richer, so we should have increased the spending. Instead, by 2015, it had fallen to 20% of GDP. And at that point, we were spending 10% of GDP less than countries at our income level are spending typically, right? And if you look at the distribution of countries at our income level, we are at the low end. So when people say we're a high spender, I don't buy that.
Okay.
I'm not objectivist. I'm an empiricist, I'm a scientist. I look at the data. It's not true.
Right.
Right? So that's number one. Secondly, I think there was also a canard, which was, I think, for a long time that we had a very huge public sector. That also was not true. That came from a misquoted, I think, Asian Development Bank report table. I remember when I digged into it, and it wasn't true, but you know, this sort of gained currency amongst the political elite. So that's on the spending side. We are very low spenders, right? We are a low health spender. We are a low education spender. We have low infrastructure spending. Now, all these people in Sri Lanka who say, oh gosh, you know, the government is going to China and borrowing money and we're, you know, indebted to China, which is not actually true. We're indebted to Wall Street right now. That's the big problem, right? Yeah. But all these accusations, why do we go to China to borrow? They give us money to build infrastructure. Why do we borrow money to build infrastructure? Because we don't spend enough from our own resources. So spending is low. We have bad infrastructure, right, to achieve rapid economic growth. So that's the spending side. On the revenue side, the situation is even more dismal because the spending is low because the revenue is low. And again, Asian Development Bank has said this, World Bank has said this, IMF has told us. They've said their one message to us, the primary message to us, your biggest problem is taxes, insufficient taxes. They said our recovery program has to be, in their terms, revenue consolidate. I think it's fiscal, a revenue-based fiscal consolidation, right? That means get your fiscal house in order, but they use the adjective revenue-based because what they're telling us in that use of very simple language, for those who maybe can't understand complex sentences, it has to be tax rise-based, right? Obviously, some people in this country in the political class cannot understand even those two words, right? So revenue-based fiscal consolidation. It's in the executive summary of what the IMF told us in their last statement, and it's repeated in their document. Now, why do they say that? Countries, as they become richer, collect more in taxes, right? In the 70s, maybe we collected too much tax, over 25% GDP. Okay. By 1990, 22% of GDP, right? And I have, you know, you can show the chart. And what's happened since then is that we became richer, but contrary, so we are the contrarians. Yeah. I'm not the contrarian for saying this, but Sri Lanka is the contrarian. In every other Asian country, as they became richer in the past 20, 30 years, they raised tax collection. Tax collection went up. And the ADB in a recent report said, emerging Asia average tax collection is 30% of GDP. If they talk about countries comparable to Sri Lanka at our income level, they said, well, countries at our income level, this is in 2015, were collecting 26% of GDP in taxes, right? We were collecting 13. We had to double tax collection even to match our peers. Now, what did we do in response to that? Under the previous administration, the Wickramasinghe-Sirisena administration, they made no improvement in raising overall taxes. So they left office with essentially a tax collection of 13% of GDP. And then this recently departed government cut taxes even more, and we went to 8 or 9% of GDP. So right now, we have a shortfall in tax collection, which you can estimate as variously from between 15 to 20% of GDP if you compare to our peers. That is our biggest problem. Right? So this, I think, is, I don't think I'm being contrarian. I'm fairly consistent with the major development banks and the IMF. Sri Lanka is the contrarian here.
Right.
Our political class have for far too long thought that market-led development depends on cutting taxes, and they're absolutely wrong.
Right.
And we need to be honest about this.